Hello, gentlemen. My name's Stewart. I'm sorry to not be with you in person. A year ago, I was lined up to come and speak, for about 3 weeks in different places in the northwest around the Armidale, the Anglican Armidale Diocese. All that lined up, and then COVID-19, and you can fill in the dots, and so I'm here on video. Actually, I'm sorry to not get out of Sydney. I grew up in Grafton, had some fun times around Moonbi, chasing a few unlucky pigs, etc. But anyway, we'll make do. So let me speak to you about something that I've been thinking about, something that I think can change the way that we see life. Here we go. The American writer Henry David Thoreau, more than 100 years ago, wrote this line. He said, "The mass of men live lives of quiet desperation." The mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. And you know what? I've found it to be true. For 30 years or more, I've been talking to blokes, and you know, if you just talk to a bloke quietly and just kind of scratch a little bit about what's going on, so often there's a quiet desperation there. And I've been wondering why. I can think of at least 3 reasons. The first one is this. You get to a certain age and your dreams begin to die. I don't just mean that you work out you're never going to play cricket for Australia. That happened to me pretty quickly. But I mean your dreams in terms of what you'd hoped for and what you'd longed for, and we get to a certain age and realise that's not going to happen. There's a bloke called Robert Bly wrote a book called Iron John. It's an American book. Let me read you a quote. It's American things in it, but you'll get the idea. He says this: "A young man in high school dreams that he will be a race driver, a mountain climber. He'll marry Miss America. He'll be a millionaire by 30. He'll get a Nobel Prize in physics by 35. He'll be an architect and build the tallest building ever. He'll get out of this hick town and live in Paris. He'll have fabulous friends. And by 35, all these dreams are ashes." So I think for most of us, we realise our dreams and things are just are not going to happen, and yet it's kind of embarrassing to talk to people about that. So that can be one reason for the kind of quiet desperation. Another one is heartache that we carry. I don't know anyone that's got to say 40 or later that doesn't carry heartache. And that might be because a marriage hasn't worked, or a business has failed, or we worry about our kids, or someone we love who is sick, or our own health is no good, or whatever. We just carry around pain. If you haven't had it yet, I'm glad, but stick around. The truck's delivering it may well be on the way. So our dreams die. We carry around heartache. Aren't you glad you came along to watch this? I'll tell you the other one that it can be, and that is Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day was a movie, kind of a comedy, made years ago now with Bill Murray. And Bill Murray plays the part of a journalist, and he's stuck in this little hick town, and he has to relive the same day again and again and again, hence the title Groundhog Day. If you haven't seen it, well worth a look. And he's just bored out of his brain. The same thing happens every day, and life gets a bit like that, doesn't it? Feel like same stuff again and again and again. In fact, you know what I managed to do, and I think it's logically impossible, that is, I managed to be bored and stressed at the same time. Right? How can you be bored and stressed simultaneously? But we kind of manage that. Well, there you go. Our dreams begin to die, we carry heartache around, we can be bored, we're stressed. So what's the answer? Well, I suppose you expect me to say, and so we'll become a Christian. And that's obviously the answer to all of this. And if you become a follower of Jesus, all of these things will disappear. Well, that's the kind of message of this book. It's very popular. I'm not putting the boot into it completely, but Wild at Heart by John Eldridge came out around the year 2000, something like that. And look, I sympathise. What he's trying to do is stop the emasculation, that's the polite word, of men in churches, and kind of give blokes their backbone back if they follow Jesus. But he says things like this. He says about what it means to follow Jesus: life is not a problem to be solved, it's an adventure to be lived. Or he says, The spiritual life cannot be made suburban. It is always frontier, and we who live in it must accept and even rejoice that it remains untamed. Or another one, don't ask yourself what the world needs, ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So following Jesus will be this great exciting adventure. And now look, I've been following Jesus for 40 years. Greatest thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm not looking for a refund, and it's wonderful, etc. But I want to say, when it comes to going to work for the 8,742nd time on a winter's morning, and you get up and you go and do it, well, especially in the city where I live, you see people, commute on trains and things, and they got the 1,000-yard stare, or they're looking at you say, please kill me. When you're in the middle of commute 8,700 and whatever it was, it may not seem like an adventure. You still get boredom and stress, and you still carry heartache, and you still... So is there an answer? Let me point you to something that I found in the New Testament. It's in the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Christians who lived in Colossae, which was a town in what's now would be a town in modern-day Turkey. And he hadn't met them. They'd become believers in Jesus through someone else. But let me read you what he says. He says this. He talks about the fact that he prays for them, that now that they've trusted Jesus, they live a life worthy of him, a life that points to him and brings him glory. And he prays that God would strengthen them. So this is Colossians chapter 1, verse 11. Listen to what he says. As he prays for these people, he says, he prays that they'd be strengthened with all power according to God's glorious might, so that they might have great... Now, what would you expect him to say? The power of God at work in these people, so they might have great, like do miracles, see thousands of people become Christians, live successful lives, become really rich. No, it's not at all. He says this, so that you may have great endurance and patience. Endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father. It's so easy to miss that. He says the power of God at work in someone's life, right, will give them endurance and patience. It may not look too impressive unless you have the right set of glasses on to see that. And then when you look at it, it's right through the New Testament. Patience is mentioned, that word, 23 times. Endurance, sometimes translated persistence, 32 times. It's there right through. Okay, so the power of God at work in someone's life, endurance and patience. Okay, we just park that for a minute. I'll come back to it. Now, I want to talk to you about something else related, and that is this. What's the difference between boys and men? Right? Or how do you know the difference between a boy and when does he become a man? Lots of different answers and lots of wrong answers out there. There's a good answer I heard. Steve Biddulph, who's a psychologist and written books on manhood, etc. He said this in a radio interview. Boys care about themselves, men care for other people. Boys care about themselves, men care about other people. Now, I guess what that means, you can be an 18-year-old man or you can be a 50-year-old boy. It's all about how you relate to other people. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a Canadian professor of psychology. Unfortunately, he's been sick this year and he's kind of been off the grid. But the previous 2-3 years, he was travelling the world and filling auditoriums mainly with young men who would turn up to hear his thoughts on life. His book, 12 Rules for Life, was the biggest selling non-fiction book last year. I think he sold 3 million copies or something. Listen to what he says, what his message is. Basically, Jordan Peterson, who is not a Christian as far as I know, but his message is this: life is hard, so grow the hell up and make life better for the people around you. And young men are saying, oh, really, that's a great idea. He says this in his book. He says, it's for this reason that I tell my students Aim to be the person at your father's funeral that everyone, in their grief and misery, can rely on. There's a worthy and noble ambition. Strength in the face of adversity. That's a very different wish than for a trouble-free life. And it's young men who are resonating with that. So I think the essence of being a man, you know, there's all this talk about toxic masculinity. The healthy masculinity is a willingness to step up and take responsibility for, look after the people around you, the people that you're responsible for. A willingness to step up and use the power that you have to do that. Now, how do you combine that? Remember I talked about endurance and patience, and then the idea of men care for other people. How do you combine those? Gentlemen, as men, we have the opportunity to invest our lives in the people that we care about. Now, if you're married, that would be your wife. If you've got kids, it's your kids, your family, your parents, if they're still around. Even if you're not married, there'll be your friends, your colleagues. If you're a follower of Jesus, the opportunity to invest in the Christian community that you belong to. You can call that a church usually. Right? But how you invest our lives in the people that we care about. Now that's what, in the end, that's what's really valuable to us, isn't it? And how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you invest and make a difference? Well, Woody Allen said 80% of life is just turning up. I wouldn't tick everything that he said, but he's spot on with that. 80% of life is just turning up. And what's that mean? Well, the way you make a difference long term is by keeping on turning up. Rarely is it one particular spectacular event or one particular spectacular thing you do, very rarely. Usually it is, I worked out what's really valuable and I keep on turning up with endurance and patience, and that's how I make a difference. Perhaps the greatest example I've ever seen of that was when I was a kid with my grandfather. Now, I was too young and too stupid to realise it at the time, but man, I see it now. Let me tell you the story of my grandfather. Donald John Shaw was born on the banks of the Clarence River near Grafton, which is where I grew up. He was born down the river a bit, and he was born in 1891. His family had come from Scotland a generation or two earlier. At the age of 24 in 1915, Donald Shaw marched from Grafton down to Sydney with the Australian Boomerang Regiment, they called themselves. They started with about 27 men, and by the time they'd taken a few weeks to march to Sydney, they arrived with 240 men who then volunteered to go and fight in the First World War. My grandfather fought in the trenches in France. He was gassed. He came home. He recovered. He became a Christian believer in a little Presbyterian church in Grafton about the age of 30. And in 1935, he had 7 children by then. He's aged 44. Had 7 children by then. The youngest of those children was my dear sweet mum. So he's going to the church, he's got 7 kids. He worked in a government job with a Pastures Protection Agency. Didn't have a lot of education, but had this job. And 1935, the minister of the church then, his name was J.P. McQueen, stands up and makes an announcement and says, I'm returning to Scotland and the services at church will be taken by Mr. Donald Shaw until the new minister arrives. Now, as far as I know, the story goes, my grandfather, it was the first he'd heard of it. He got the flick pass to take the church services. Okay, so what do you do? Well, as I said, my granddad didn't have a lot of education. He personally didn't feel that he could preach. So what he used to do was he would read and prepare written sermons from some of the greats. I don't know if you've heard of Charles Spurgeon or J.C. Ryle or George Whitfield, from a couple of hundred years ago. And he would prepare them, work out exactly how long it would take to read, and he would read them in this beautiful, deep, strong voice. I can still remember that as a kid. He led the singing at church. etc. And so this is what he did. Church twice on Sunday and often on Wednesday night as well. If he went on holidays, they would catch the bus down to Yamba, beautiful beach at the end of the Clarence. He would then catch the bus back on a Saturday afternoon, take the church meetings and go on the bus back on the Monday. That's what he did. That's the holidays that he ever took. He rode his bicycle from one side of Grafton to the other carrying a push lawnmower and mowed the lawn. And that's what he did. He maintained the church meetings until the next minister arrived 37 years later. That's 37 years later, 1972, the next minister arrived. My grandfather was then 81 years old. That's what he did. He died in 1983. He was aged 92 then. Now, what difference did that make? Well, it's now 85 years since my grandfather got the flick pass to, was given the responsibility, better way to say it, was given the responsibility of looking after the church meetings 85 years ago. Did he make a difference? Well, his third great-grandchild is about to be baptised in that little Presbyterian church. And the church is not huge, but still going strong. You see, that man, Donald John Shaw, saw what he really valued, what he really cared about, his family, that church, the message of Jesus, and he kept on turning up every week for 37 years. And that is how you make a difference, endurance and patience in our life. And so the challenge, gentlemen, if I could put it to you, is this: what do you really value and what will you keep turning up and investing in? You don't do it, once you realise that, you don't do it kind of passive or resigned or bent over. You do it, or sulky or petulant. You do it deliberately because you know that's what you're doing. That's what you're investing in. And it's like, I will get up on a Saturday morning and I will take my kids to sport, and I'll do it happily because I want to. I will get up every day 10,000 times or whatever it is and go to work. Why? Because I'm going to feed my family, or I'm going to look after my workmates. I want the money to be able to invest in what I really care about. I will get up on a Sunday morning and I will, if I'm a follower of Jesus, I will turn up at church. Why? Because I'm investing in the people that I really care about. And if you're not married, if you don't have a wife and kids, there'll be other people that you'll be able to care for and invest in, and other things that you'll really value. As I look at my own life, have I achieved anything? Well, what I have achieved mostly, it's been by just keeping on turning up. About 40 years ago, I met this drop-dead gorgeous little Chinese lady at university. And when her family of high achievers and, her brothers are successful businessmen, etc. And, when I turned up, they were so enthusiastic about me that they told her she could have an around-the-world trip to anywhere she wanted for as long as she wanted, as long as I didn't go. Now, for some reason, she chose me. We've been married, actually in January, it's 40 years. And then a few years ago, not long ago, one of Kathy's brothers, I'm at the parents' house, one of Kathy's brothers put his arm around me and said, "Well, thanks for being a good brother-in-law and looking after our little sister." And I said to Kathy later, "Well, that only took 35 years. She said, "Well, what did you expect?" What happened? Well, you just keep turning up day by day by day. You keep turning up. I think over the years I've given about 4,000 Bible talks. Any one of them spectacular? No, not really, but you do 4,000 talks and they've actually done some good. Or I look back, Katoomba Christian Convention, KCC. Katoomba Christian Convention is a convention for Christians at Katoomba. I was involved for 30 years, all sorts of committees, running all sorts of things, and I think I made 150 trips from Sydney to Katoomba and back. And anything particularly one-off spectacular? No, but you just keep turning up and it makes a difference. So What are you going to keep turning up to? And now, not domesticated, not emasculated, not with the joy sucked out of life, but decide, no, this is what I care about. This is what I'm going to keep on doing. And that's how I make a difference. Now, you also still need to have fun. You've got to have something that that you plan, that you do. One of my mates runs ultra marathons. So he'll train and then run like a 100-kilometre race over 15 or 16 hours. Crazy, but that's what he loves to do. Me, I save up all year and get up to North Queensland in Cape York and adjust the feral animal population. Anyway, where I live, you have to call it ecotourism, but that's what I do. And you'll need fun too, and whether that's hitting a golf ball or catching fish or whatever it is. So we need stuff that's fun, but what will you keep turning up to? Because when you decide that, it changes it, doesn't it? I remember one of my favourite episodes of The Simpsons is like a flashback, and it's when Homer and Marge only had 2 kids, Bart and Lisa. Homer works out, normally his job's at the nuclear power plant, and he works out that if he leaves the power plant with just 2 kids, he and Marge can survive on his dream job, which is working at the bowling alley. And so Homer quits tells Mr. Burns to stick his job, quits that from the nuclear power plant, off to the bowling alley, and he's loving life. Sticks his head in the bowling ball shiner to get his head really shiny, all that stuff. And then the unexpected happens. Marge gets pregnant with Maggie, the third, the little one. And they can't survive on that salary. And so Homer has to go back to the nuclear power plant, and Mr. Burns has 2 doors, one for applicants and the other one like a pet door called for supplicants. And Homer has to crawl through the supplicant door, beg for his job back. Mr. Burns gives him his job back, but you'll see here on the slide, in front of Homer's desk, Homer's chair in the power plant, Mr. Burns puts a sign that says, "Don't forget, you're here forever." And then the final scene, you see Homer's got pictures of Maggie, the baby that's been born, and he's put the pictures across that sign so that it reads, "Do it for her, do it for her." And that's a profound thing, because he understands that turning up each day at the power plant might suck the life out of him, but everything's different because he knows he's doing it for her. He's doing it day by day. You know, the Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson said this: "Everyday courage has few witnesses, but yours is no less noble because no drum beats for you and no crowds shout your name." There'll be no crowds or cheering when you get up and go to work for the 8,743rd time. But it takes courage, endurance and patience, because you're investing in the people and what you really care about. And so that's what makes a difference in the long run. And now, if you're a follower of Jesus, even more so, doesn't it? Because as a follower of Jesus, you have the opportunity to invest in people and people knowing him, and that has value into eternity. And so as a follower of Jesus, especially with your mates who aren't followers, who don't know Jesus, the real test is to live a consistent life in front of them, to live a life that points to Jesus in the way that you live, in the right way, so that when you get the opportunity to speak, you'll have credibility and they'll listen. So we've got to play the long game, and that takes endurance and patience. And maybe you're not a follower of Jesus yet. Maybe this is all kind of new and you haven't thought about that. I want to ask you, what is it that you really value, and what or who gives your life meaning and purpose? Because what Jesus offers is the opportunity to actually know your Creator, to know why you were created, and to know purpose in life, and to know forgiveness and the promise of eternal life. And you know, the greatest thing is to actually read the words of Jesus and understand what he promises and offers and how that can be life transforming. If you've never done that, you might like to talk to, you may well have been invited by a Christian bloke, a bloke who follows Jesus. You could talk to him or your local Anglican minister. They'd all be keen to help you. So, endurance and patience and keeping on turning up. That's how we make a difference in the long run.